Hello, everyone. Since we're not going to be getting together this week, I thought I'd make this little devotional video and thought it'd be a great time just to do an overview of the book of Genesis. Again, just to kind of refresh as we go into the last chapters of Genesis here. And then next week, since we're not meeting again, I'll do another little video and we're going to look at Genesis 1, 2, and 3, a nice little overview since they're kind of a foundation of what we've been looking at. And so keep in mind as you go through the scroll of Genesis that it's broken up into two sections. You got chapters 1 through 11, which focuses on God and humanity as a whole. And then you've got Genesis 12 through 50, which then takes the story from humanity as a whole in its relationship with God to God and one family through the man Abraham. And so if you keep that kind of overall outline in mind, you start to see how it comes out. As we went through the different chapters. And so Genesis 1 through 11 focuses on how God orders the cosmos, and in the wild and waste, the tohu vavohu, he places a garden, and that's where he then creates man from the dust out of the wild and waste and places him into the garden to keep the garden, to be God's image, and basically to take God's purposes of the garden space and to take its potential out into the chaotic wilderness. And so remember, the Garden of Eden is a heaven and earth space. It's where heaven and earth are together. In the center there is where the tree of life is, and the whole hope and the purpose. God has created humanity in his image to partner with him, to take his purposes out into the chaos. And this is represented by the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so if they take the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they will experience death. And basically what that represents is that tree represents humanity following their own wisdom instead of following God. It's not that God wasn't ever going to show them the difference between good and evil, or good and bad, Ra and Tov. It's that they needed to get that knowledge in God's terms and not their own terms. But then we get that mysterious serpent who comes into the scene, and he basically manipulates humanity into going after their own wisdom and neglecting God. And as a result, death comes into humanity and the world and all of creation. And we see this transpire from chapters 4 through 11, which culminates in the flood and the Tower of Babylon. And so we get the story of what God was doing in ordering the materialistic world, but it wasn't so much about what he was creating as its function. And our purpose there as God's images was to take his plan and to take it out into the wild, into waste, to be partners in his order and his goodness and his life. But we chose the other path, and hence evil and chaos is continually in the world. And that's when he makes the promise in chapter 3 that there's going to be a seed of the woman who comes and is going to redeem all things. And so then in chapters 12 through 50, humanity itself just continues to spiral down. And so now he's going to pull one man out of chaos, Abraham. And through him, he's going to work his plan of redemption. And I think one of the keys to remember is Abraham's story is not a perfect story. Abraham and his descendants make a mess of things over and over. But the one thing that they do is they continually stay loyal to Yahweh. And so therefore, even though they're a mess, God's going to work with what he's got, and he is going to see his plan and his purposes through. And so the scroll of Genesis then ends with the story of Joseph. And Joseph kind of becomes this messianic shadow figure. He's a picture of the Messiah to come. And the scroll of Genesis ends with Israel prospering in Egypt, and it's setting up the rest of the story in the Torah, and then ultimately all of the scriptures. And so, what's the purpose of Genesis? Well, I think the Bible Project, in their big idea in the Genesis guide, really kind of sums it up really well. So I'll read that here. They write, "Out of disorder and darkness, God creates order, beauty, and goodness. From Genesis 3 onward, humans continue acting selfishly and doing evil, but God remains faithful and refuses to abandon them or his world." And that's a great summary of the overall story of the Genesis scroll. Genesis is the foundation to the story of why there's evil and corruption in the world and what God's going to do about it. It really is the scroll, the story, the book you need to understand in order to understand all of Scripture. And so it lays the foundation for the rest of the story. And in order to understand the themes throughout the rest of the Old Testament, as well as the themes of Jesus's earthly ministry, and then what he's doing through the church, they're all here in Genesis. They're all laid out first here. In fact, Jesus himself basically states that everything that the Old Testament said about him is there. And so I hope this kind of overview helps everybody out again as we get closer and closer to the end of Genesis. It really is a great part of the Bible to understand, and I think it's also misunderstood in many ways. So you all have a fantastic week, and looking forward to getting back to you all in person at the end of December.